Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm a producer here with Promethean Action, joined with the lovely Barbara Boyd and Susan Kokinda. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on X.com or on Twitter, on X.com and on YouTube. On YouTube, I currently have both a regular widescreen format and a vertical format. As you're joining the stream, please let us know where you're watching from, and we're going to get started in just a few moments. So, Barbara, today we're going to be discussing a lot more of the political dynamics as we move into the midterm. Susan's going to be talking about it. But I believe you had something special prepared for our audience this morning.
Hot damn for all you guys out there. There's been a major arrest. And we're going to talk about it.
Okay, so what do you got?
All right. So yesterday, the former intelligence director and financial director of the SPLC, for our international audience who don't know what this is, the SPLC, basically is the centerpiece of the private intelligence operation in the United States directed at Donald Trump, and has been ever since this wonderful event we had here in the United States called Charlottesville, which many people may remember was a big fight between people they said was, she's wonderful looking. She looks the part, doesn't she? I hate to criticize people's looks, but when I saw her, I just said, wow, that sort of makes sense. At any rate, the woman you see there was running informants who were actually informants in the only remaining very small right-wing groups in the United States, like the Ku Klux Klan, which wouldn't exist, in my view, if it weren't for this woman and the SPLC. What they were doing was they were pumping money into these groups to keep them alive, and then they were turning around and saying to their donors, hey, guys, there's these major terrorist, racist operations in the United States linked to Donald Trump, and we at the SPLC have to stop them. And they set up the whole Charlottesville rally where a lady got killed. And essentially what happened was you had a bunch of neo-Nazis and right-wingers, and then you had a bunch of counter-protesters, and there was a riot. And what happened in August 2017, President Trump came out and said there were decent people who were there protesting about taking down the statue of Robert E. Lee, which was the ostensible reason for all of this protesting. He said, what are we going to do? Are we going to take down George Washington's statue because he was a slave owner? Where does this end? And he basically said there were horrible people who were Nazis and neo-Nazis, and I condemn them, but you have to look at the other side. And what happened out of that is Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and that whole nest took the president's words that there were good people on both sides of this riot, okay, completely distorted what he said, and that became the reason, you won't believe this, why Joe Biden ran for president in 2020. His actual campaign announcement said, when I saw what happened there and what Donald Trump said about it, I decided we were in a battle for the soul of our nation. It's probably the most coherent statement he's made. There are other pictures of this during the campaign where he's literally out there in his senile self actually ranting about Charlottesville at great length. So what happened is the Justice Department brought an indictment against the whole organization, and that takes out a big part of the operation against Trump. Then in the indictment yesterday, they indicted the lady who set up all these false bank accounts, paying these informants. And it turned out she was actually sleeping with one of them. And she took their money and, paid for their personal living expenses out of it between she and this neo-Nazi. Okay. So this is just ripe in my opinion. And I think it's going to go pretty far. And you have the whole legal lawfare establishment coming in to defend against this indictment. Abbe Lowell, many of you out there in other parts of the country don't know, but Abbe Lowell is a DC lawyer who's the Biden family lawyer, along with just about every other politician in DC who ever gets in trouble. And he's who's taking on this case to defend the SPLC. It's a very big deal because these are the people, along with the ADL, who define who are extremists in the United States. And they're the people who actually were defining MAGA protesters and the MAGA movement as racists, throughout this entire period. I wrote about the Charlottesville thing when it happened. And, I said it was really a complete intelligence community set up when it happened. And I detailed some of the personnel behind that. But I had no idea that it went this far, to say the least. So it's a big deal. And in many respects, it's an institutional thing that you're actually taking out rather than an individual. This individual just happens to be the face of the institution. Going back in time, what happened after Charlottesville is the SPLC, this terrible organization, doubled and tripled its income. And corporate executives and everybody else throughout the United States was throwing money at this organization, which was actually building the racist ferment, which was going to be used against the president. All right. So it's really quite a story.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'd like to give a big thank you to everyone tuning into our stream. Before we get to Susan, I want to give a quick shout out here to Andy Wilson. Thank you for the very generous super chat. I hope you are subscribed. I'm assuming you're subscribed to the channel, but please make sure you get our free email newsletter. The link is in the description. That's the best way for us to stay in contact with you. So please make sure you're getting our free email newsletter. Love to have you here, and send in a question if you have one. Thank you very much. And Paul Trainer, thank you for joining us every week. Our just so many friends from across the pond. We had a funny comment earlier before the stream started. So many friends from across the pond. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today. So, Susan, what do you have for our audience this morning?
Well, look, I want to build on that because what the Southern Poverty Law Center story, which is just part of British intelligence's toolkit to keep people in a box where they control the ideologies, they control the choices. It's left versus right. It's Democrat versus Republican. Whatever the binaries they want to feed you. That's how they've essentially controlled politics for a whole lot of the post-war period. But then along came Donald Trump and really began to break open that box by bringing an entirely new element in to the political process, which is restoring the American system of political economy, rebuilding our middle class and our working class, which then has a particular political aspect to it, which I believe the president is very conscious of. So last week and over the course of this week with Barbara and my other YouTube shows, we've dug into the question of Abdul al-Sayed, the Democratic Socialist nominee for Senate here in Michigan. And we've gone into his British and imperial bona fides, and I really encourage people to look at what we've produced, and there's going to be a whole lot more. Because again, one of the other boxes that they want to put you in is Muslim versus anti-Muslim. And that is a false box. And I'm going to say it right up front, and I don't care how many people are upset by that. There is political radical Islam, which is an arm of British intelligence. It is extremely dangerous. And that's what Abdul al-Sayed is part of that larger apparatus. But the critical conception is that President Trump is taking us out of these controlled choices. And it's having a particular political impact at this moment, because one of the things that we saw, and this is what I'm going to develop here, one of the things that we saw in the Michigan election, which I want people to be highly conscious of, is what happened in the city of Detroit. Detroit is a city which is like 80% Black. And, you know, in the Southern Poverty Law Center's fantasy world, right, of left versus right, the people of Detroit who are the poor, downtrodden, et cetera, they're all going to vote for Abdul El-Sayed. Wrong. Here's how the vote worked out. It was primarily a two-way race, as people know. Haley Stevens, the establishment-backed Democratic candidate, and Abdul El-Sayed. But there was still a third person on the ballot, Mallory McMorrow, who had dropped out and endorsed Haley Stevens. McMorrow and Haley Stevens are white women, okay? White middle class or upper class women, whatever. You know, here's Abdul El-Sayed, the face of the revolution of the poor and downtrodden. Haley Stevens and McMorrow got twice as many votes as El-Sayed in the city of Detroit. The Black voters in the city of Detroit voted for the two white ladies. And obviously it had absolutely nothing to do with the color of anybody's skin, because they reject this radical insanity, which the elites are pushing at this particular point. Now, President Trump was quite conscious of that. Whoops, I'm going to share the screen if I hit the right button. Oh, come on. He was quite conscious of that, and he posted that. Why am I there? No, wrong one. There we go. Sorry, I'll do better next time. He posted that in a truth that he put out. He said, Black and brown voters don't want communism or socialism. Not surprisingly, they're flocking to the Republican Party. They remember that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican president, President Donald J. Trump. Now, that's very precise. That's very important that he said that, because as we've been saying all along, the essence of President Trump's thrust, what the MAGA movement has to consciously become, Trump gets it, and we got to make sure the MAGA movement gets it, is the new Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, the new Republican Party that harks back to Abraham Lincoln's policies. And of course, what have we seen in the city of Detroit and elsewhere? You've had a kind of automatic knee-jerk, nobody ever thinks about the Republicans. So, Adam, we can stop sharing that, or I can stop sharing that. Now, I want Adam to play a video excerpt. Let me give it a little bit of introduction. This was from the local news here in Michigan a couple of days ago. And when I saw this, I was like, wow, I've never seen anything represent more powerfully the potential that we have to completely reshape politics in the United States away from these phony divisions, which is how the empire works, to a broad-based political movement of people who want to produce, who want to have a future, who still love this country, whatever their skin color, whatever their religion. If they love this country, they are part of this coalition. And I will say it again, because I'm not going to back off on this. There are many Muslims in this country who love this country, and they are part of this coalition as well. But the clip that Adam is about to show you is one which shows, I think, something absolutely amazing happening in the city of Detroit, because, again, as the president said, Black and brown voters don't want to be communists or socialists. So this is an interview that one of our local newscasters had with a longtime Detroit City Councilwoman named Mary Waters, who had a very interesting breakfast either earlier that day or the day before. She had breakfast with the Republican senatorial candidate. I don't know when anything like this has happened. So, Adam, if you could play that clip.
You might sense a common theme tonight, which seems to be a divide in the Democratic State Party. Well, Detroit Councilwoman Mary Waters sitting down with us after talking to Republican Mike Rogers this morning. So, Mary, thanks for being here. How was your breakfast this morning?
It was great. It was a great conversation. And you know, Charlie is an individual, an elected city council member representing nearly 700,000 people throughout this city. It was very important that I took the time to hear what Mike Rogers had to say, his plans for the city of Detroit. And he talked about the land use plans for that. We discussed skilled trades. We discussed seniors, veterans. Mike Rogers has a plan for all of those categories. Now, let me tell you, he says, Mary, I don't expect to win the city of Detroit. He said that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he says, but I do want people to know that I care, that I want to listen, that I have a plan.
Is this something that, you liked what you heard, I'm assuming?
I do like what I heard. And I want Detroiters to be able to hear what I've heard. Because Charlie, listen, let me tell you this. We cannot continue to stay on the same plantation, Democratic plantation, or even a Republican plantation. We have got to allow people hear from other people, hear what they have to. I have to, as an elected official, have to make sure that people know what to expect from all of the candidates. And I want Detroiters to hear from them. And now they get to make up their own mind, Charlie. Sure. Mary Waters is not going to do that for them.
There's a little bit more, Adam. There's just a little break.
The Skilled Trade Task Force. I created the first veterans. I also chair the Skilled Trade Task Force. I created the first Veterans Department at the city of Detroit. We don't treat our veterans right here, not just here in the city, but not in the state of Michigan, not even in the country.
Why don't Detroiters vote for Republicans in big numbers?
Well, because they've just been conditioned to voting for Democrats. And maybe it's because they can relate to more of the issues that the Democrats put out. But I want them to keep an open mind and look at all of the candidates.
Okay. That's how you break a controlled environment, right? You just let people listen to the fact that the person who's been demonized is a nice person, and notice the things that she focused on. She said twice in there, his commitment to skilled trades. Everybody that has followed us know that this is one of our passions, that the way you rebuild the middle class and the working class is you revive the blue collar jobs, you revive the skilled trades, you give people the kind of jobs where one income can raise a family. That is the story of Detroit. People in Detroit know that, and that's why they didn't vote for Abdul El-Sayed. And I think this is extremely important going forward. I mean, I'm sure people also notice, get off the plantation, Mary Waters said, right? You know, you don't have to be told by your masters any longer who to vote for. Go think for yourself. That's all you need in these circumstances, is for people to finally start to think for themselves. But the emphasis that she put on the skilled trades, I think, is extremely important, because this is the window into the essential message for the midterm elections. How do you defeat a socialist communist threat? You defeat it by showing them the system that worked, which is not globalization, by the way. It is the American system of production. And that's what the president is doing. I want to share one more slide here. This is something the president tweeted today, and I found it extremely important that he had done this. It's an endorsement of the Oklahoma governor in the upcoming governor's race. His name is Mike Massie, but he's running against a rhino, and I think it's extremely important. Trump identifies that his opponent was part of the anti-American Lincoln Project, which is an anti-Trump project. But then he highlights that this rhino is trying to stop the construction of here's Trump's words, He wants to dethrone a magnificent, job-producing, desperately needed, and brand new aluminum plant that will be one of the best projects ever conceived or built, not only for the great state of Oklahoma, but in the United States. It will be one of the most successful job-creating plants ever built in our country. And the group that's, and then he says, the group that's trying to shut it down is extremely wealthy. And if they don't do it in, the group that wants to build it is extraordinarily wealthy. If they don't do it in Oklahoma, they're going to do it someplace else. And then again, he uses this to endorse very, very strongly the gubernatorial candidate who is fighting to keep this aluminum plant going. So I thought that was very, very important that the president picked up on a critical economic issue. And in fact, in our current half-page flyer, we highlight that particular aluminum plant in terms of the number of jobs and things that it needs to bring in. I just want to wrap up this opening from the standpoint that it is so stressing, it is so important that while the president dismantles the enemy's apparatus, whether it's the Southern Poverty Law Center, while they eviscerate socialism and communism, all of which you need to do, that you do not lose focus on the positive message of the economic renaissance, which is out there, because you can see how that resonated with Black voters in Detroit. And if we do what we have to do properly, we're going to come out of these midterm elections with a new political formation, which will be a majority of people in this country of all racial backgrounds and religious backgrounds, the Americans who are committed to building this country, and then the crazies and the dangerous extremists will be a little teeny tiny minority over there in a corner, and half of them will have already gone to jail.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you to everyone watching us on YouTube and X.com. Just a few housekeeping announcements here. So I am broadcasting 2 streams to YouTube, both traditional widescreen and a vertical for watching on mobile. You can switch between the two by just going to our channel page, and you should see both streams. In the future, I plan on trying to use the native YouTube feature to merge both the widescreen and the vertical one into a single video, and it'll just depend on if you come through the shorts feed or if you come through the watch page. So I'm going to work on improving that experience, but right now we are broadcasting to 2 streams. And I am getting super chats from both streams this time. So let's go and take some super chats here real quick. The first one here, brother, I laughed so hard at this. Barbara, if I say too much, please tell me I can't say this. Is Promethean Action connected to the old LaRouche movement that came to my campus in 2004? So that was the University of Toledo. I had a little discussion. Thank you, Drew, for letting me know. I enjoy your content and message. When you mention LaRouche, I always think of the culty movement. Okay. Well, the LaRouche youth movement was really unique. I was part of that whole process and movement back in 2004. In fact, I was in Ohio at the time. I don't remember if I was actually in Toledo, but I spent many months in 2004 in Ohio. On the cult thing, though, I reflect on this a lot. Definitely not a cult. I think if you want to look at the political cult, you should look at what the left has basically done to the entire Democratic Party. And to comment, and just to complete the comment on this, I don't want to say too much about our history, because we do have a lot of legal stuff surrounding it, but we basically did go through a split, and some of those cult people in the past ended up in the Democratic Party still. So I think those old cult-like things have been excised, and now we're better than anything we were doing in the past. We're going to build a youth movement too. It's going to take some time. So thank you, Drew. Barbara and Susan, any thoughts on this one? Because people are, we don't hide it at all. People find out that we previously were associated with a different organization. Any comments?
Well, I just have to say we're not associated with the current Helga Zepp-LaRouche operation, okay? Because we disagreed with them politically. But it wasn't a cult. It was a bunch of people who really thought about ideas, and you don't find that in a cult the way that we fought about ideas, to say the least. And basically what the cult characterization came pretty late in the FBI, CIA attacks on LaRouche, right? In other words, first he was a communist, then he was a right-wing, kind of Genghis Khan figure, who was going to murder the human race. And then, they settled on this idea that, it sounds pretty nasty, you're brainwashed in a cult. This was as Ramsey Clark said, a bunch of book people, all right? A bunch of people who loved history, read, loved science. Basically, it was a university on wheels. But disagreement and, some kind of David Koresh figure being Lyndon LaRouche, no way, Jose. That it was completely much, much different than that. If you go back and look, there's a reason why Norman Bailey said, who was the big economist on the Reagan Security Council, that we had the best private intelligence operation in the entire world. Because we basically said, hey, if you're going to run a political movement in the United States, you have to learn about the whole world, because that's how politics functions, and you better be damn good about it, and you better be right. And Lyndon was a great teacher in that respect, of trying to show you political dynamics, not these kind of noun-like, lattice structures, which everybody constructs, is really what it's about. It's about change. And how do you measure change? And I've never heard of a cult that actually tried to do that. So that's what I'd have to say about that.
Yeah, one other aspect of that I do want to bring in, because, Barbara and I both and our channels get people, because we're not running around saying the Jews run everything. You probably noticed we don't say that. People say, oh, well, then you're obviously Zionists. You're obviously in the payroll of the Zionists and so on. And I honestly just crack up when I hear that, because part of the attack on us back in the 70s and the 80s, a coordinated attack which came through the FBI, came through intelligence channels, which called us a cult, which called us Nazis, which called us dangerous, which called us anti-Semitic and so on. The Anti-Defamation League was officially part of a Get LaRouche coalition back in the 1970s and the 1980s. So, people say, well, you're obviously Zionist. You're paid for by AIPAC. In fact, I ran into somebody like this at one of the polls when it was just a question of, I said, are you voting Republican? Because you need to find out whether they're going to vote on your side of the ballot before you bother to talk to them. He says, are you being paid by AIPAC? And when he came out, I said, Sonny, I was fighting the mother of AIPAC before you were even born, and it kind of caught him up short. And then we ended up having a good discussion. But I did want to bring up that ADL aspect of this, because it really is extremely lazy at best, ignorant sort of in the middle, and malicious for people who know better to claim that we're in the payroll of AIPAC.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to everyone tuning in. Drew came in with a second thing to clarify, and I think we'll take a quick detour to talk about something. I always like talking to them. I just didn't want to drop out of college and go on the road, but everyone I talked to, the group was interesting. Thank you. What I would say today is, yeah, our previous idea about recruitment was a little bit crazy, but what we do have today, and this is what I suggest. First, get our free email newsletter. That way you can we can stay in contact with you. But the more important thing that I was thinking about was if you actually want to try and get active with us and not like drop your life and come, do some crazy political organizing with us, how about our midterm boot camp, right? Yeah. So I don't know if we're doing one next week, but we have a program now with Promethean PAC, which is our political Federal Election Commission approved organization that can intervene and tell people, drive out the vote and stuff. If you check out here, sign up for a midterm boot camp, right? We do weekly meetings and we encourage people to actually get more active in politics to get off the sidelines and actually begin to take part in the drama that's playing out before us. You know, so many people, they watch the drama from the comfort of their homes, right? They watch the drama from the comfort of their smartphones. But the people that actually do something are the ones that actually have to get involved in the drama themselves. So please join us. Come over here to Promethean PAC. You can just search for Promethean PAC or Promethean PAC midterm boot camp. We have pretty good SEO. It should pop up. So I encourage you not to drop everything anymore, but consider possibly joining our midterm boot camp. We have people from all political walks, right? People that have won elections, people that have done stuff in the past, people that are brand new. So everyone should check out our midterm boot camp. And thank you very much, Drew, for making me smile and bringing back those funny memories from 2004. Thank you. But everyone, please, if you're on YouTube, drop us a like. If you're on x.com, give us a quick share. So many more super chats. I'm going to read a few more of these, and then we're going to get some questions. Java just says, thank you all for your work. I've learned a lot and a lot of questions, answers. Thank you very much, Java. AWOL Stu, know you're loved and appreciated. Thank you for joining us again this week, brother. Dan Anders, no message, just thank you. Promethean Action and Promethean Overviews. I'm sure if Mike is watching, he's thanking you right now. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today. And here we have a good questions. Musa, I guess Iranian from Canada. Thank you very much for joining us today. Greetings, Mrs. Kokinda. Do you think the reason why America got Trump in 2016 is because we did not get Ross Perot in 1992, Pat Buchanan in 2000, and Ralph Nader in 2008? Thank you very much for your question. Susan, your thoughts?
No, I think that's a very good question. Obviously, seeds were planted, especially by Ross Perot with the giant sucking sound, and Pat Buchanan, who was a very different character. He was, a kind of pre-Trump character. Nader is not really in the same category, but he obviously addressed people who thought that there was something wrong. And at least they began to raise, his solutions were not right, but Buchanan's and Perot's were a little closer to where you actually identify and begin to solve the problems. But I'm going to rephrase that question, given the conversation that we just had. Do you think the reason why America got Trump in 2016 is because we did not get Lyndon LaRouche in the 1980s? Because before Ross Perot was saying this, and in fact, his famous half-hour infomercial where he warned about NAFTA, and he said this was going to lead to a giant sucking sound, taking all of our jobs and sending them to Asia. That infomercial was based on the infomercials that we did. We did scores of them through LaRouche's presidential campaigns in the 1980s, which millions of people saw, and they sat there scratching their heads saying, holy crap, how can somebody be on NBC at 10:55 at night actually saying these things about the Trilateral Commission and Henry Kissinger being a Soviet agent and attacking environmentalism?
We got to dig up some of those broadcasts, man. They were a hoot. And to know that they were on prime time television.
Prime time, because you could buy a half hour of prime time for $250,000 back then. And millions of people saw them. But I think it's extremely important to understand, and this is sort of the through thread from LaRouche to Trump, is LaRouche came under vicious attack, both slanders and legal attack. One of the people who indicted him was Robert Mueller, and we have a pamphlet that goes through this. It's entitled "Why the British Murder American Presidents," but the last section of it is on Trump, and it draws some of the parallels to the attacks that we had on us. But he was framed up, he was thrown in jail. And look, what happened with a lot of people, and this is the importance of true leadership, is they said, oh no, we're never going to get anywhere. Here was a guy who said things I didn't think anybody was ever going to say. And they framed him up and they threw him in jail. And then people put their heads down. So yes, you did have Perot and Buchanan kind of reviving a kind of spirit, But look, the issue of Trump and his courage cannot be minimized, because it's not just that he stands for what he stands for, that it doesn't matter. He stands and fights. We all know the iconic fight, fight, fight image, but that captures everything. And as much as important as the policies are, that quality of fight is absolutely indispensable, because without that, too many people don't have the courage to do this on their own or alone. And that's the importance of Trump and the MAGA movement. And that's why so much effort is being spent right now to demoralize it, distract it, and so on, which is why we're here, because we have to sound the certain trumpet in terms of what the fight is, with a clarity that I don't think anybody else has.
Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you to our Iranian friends from Canada. I recently found out that a lot of you guys and gals are following us very closely. So I see your other questions too. We'll get to them as the show goes on. Thank you very much for joining us. Dane, thank you very much for joining us again this week. Always enjoy having you here. Daniel on site says, I used to work for very high profile clients, too much to discuss, but Bohemian Grove was part of it, regardless party, just too much to discuss. Yes, I don't know what part of the thing you were referring to, but thank you, Daniel on site, for joining us today. Barbara, Susan, any comments about Bohemian Grove?
Well, that's a pretty famous raunchy elite gathering in and around San Francisco, California, which occurred back in the 70s and 80s and 90s with pretty much regularity, where all of them would go there. They went to the Grove, as it's described in their various talks about it, and hang out during the summertime and do God knows what. I don't really, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there about what actually went on there and what kind of sexual perversions were actually being practiced. But, you know, it was kind of like a raunchy, elite gathering, which everybody went to who was anybody. And that's probably what you're referring to, Daniel. And kind of, I assume you have some inside information about some of that. And if you feel comfortable about outlining it, I'm really very interested in that, because part of the LaRouche prosecutions actually was an email. You know, I enjoyed seeing you at the Grove, and here's the next step in what we're doing here against Lindell and LaRouche. So I've always been very interested in what goes on at the Grove.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. So many. I'm going to go through a few more super chats here. Greg, I don't remember seeing your name here. Thank you so much for the $20. Make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter. Fenderman, awesome to see you here again every week. Dane sent in a funny comment, says, enforcing belief in pregnant men might be a cult. Oh my gosh. Oh, the level of mental gymnastics that's occurring on the left is truly astounding. Pregnant people, right? I don't birthing. What I call them, birthing people or something.
Yes, it's not a mother; it's a birthing person.
It's a birthing person. You know what? Oh, geez, crazy world we live in. Thank you so much, Dane, for joining us. Okay, let's go to some questions from our email newsletter. I'm sorry I forgot to send out the Tuesday invitation email. I got overloaded here. I'm still moving from cross country and stuff. But we still got a bunch of questions in. So let me just start with the first ones here, which is going to be on the Democratic Party and their new brand of their new socialist branding that have really started hitting over the last few years. So Bob says, what justification do Democrats think they have to protect America from socialist capture when the party demonstrates that they are not even able to prevent party capture from radical socialists? Even beer-guzzling Wisconsin voters are not that inept. Thank you, Bob. And Eddie says, as a follow-up, do the Democrats and the media understand the implications for their opposition to the American system, or do they simply adhere to the party line? Barbara and Susan.
I guess that means I start. Look, the Democratic Party has a terrible history, which most people know. I mean, if you look back on the Confederacy and you actually think about all of that, you realize that was really awful, and they were the basic protectors of the slaveocracy in the South during the Civil War. So that's where we start. Okay, we get some relief with FDR's World War II mobilization, where he actually embraced the American system of political economy. We get some intelligence from John F. Kennedy, but stepping out of line there was basically get you shot. Even Bill Clinton had some very intelligent proposals when he wasn't losing his ability to keep his zipper closed. So, the kind of thing which is going on now is this party, after Obama, changed from any kind of traditional American political party. When you see the people who are defecting now into the Republicans, some of them, like the lawyer Julian Epstein, who used to work for the Judiciary Committee in the House, just declared that he's changing parties because the party has gone completely off the deep end. And it has. You can't find that much of a distinction between these radical crazies who they've let loose at this point and what Barack Obama or Joe Biden were actually pushing. I mean, the Biden and Obama programs were dressed up in nice language, but they went to the same completely destructive place that you see with these nihilists who are the people who are out to, as they themselves say, destroy Western civilization. And Barack Obama embraced the entire green agenda from the globalists, and that was about taking down all modern industrial societies and getting right back to feudalism, which is, they think that's the kind of situation where you basically, as Susan's friend said, get on the plantation rather than off the plantation. So that's what's going on in the Democratic Party. There's really no fundamental difference between a Barack Obama and the crazies he's actually setting loose here. All right. And if you look, what I did in my video, which was a little dense, Adam told me, and, I think that's probably true. But what I did in my video was that, I tried to go through the fact that all of these candidates who are out there in the media have direct links to Barack Obama. Abdul El-Sayed didn't just start talking to Barack Obama nicely last week after the election. When you actually look at his bio and you look at who's supporting him, it's very clear he's completely Soros funded. And, if you know the history of it, it was George Soros, a British agent. A lot of people treat him the wrong way. He was a British agent, sent exactly for the same purpose. Look at the policies he sponsored. You're talking about destroying Western civilization. Well, what does flooding the nation with dope do? Soros was for that. You want to destroy the nation? What does open borders do? George Soros was almost the originator of that entire policy called for open society formation, so-called. You want to destroy a nation? Get them completely obsessed with sex and sexual identity, and actually go out to destroy the family and call it a patriarchy. George Soros was for that. So was Barack Obama. It's the same policy, destroy the United States. They just dress it up in better language than the, crazy commie terrorist operation of the Democratic Party actually does. These people I'm sure when we actually get to the nub of the investigation, you all know that in the summer of 2020, there was a planned overthrow of the entire American government by Obama's forces in the CIA and in the academic sphere and in the Democratic Party. It was called the Transition Integrity Project. And in that point, they said they needed two things. And this is what they're talking about. They're talking about overthrowing the government. All right. We need two things: the military, which you could argue that General Milley was really on board with the whole thing. And we need the people who just did all the Black Lives Matter destruction of the country to actually be a little bit more disciplined and actually follow our orders. That's what was in that policy. The same grouping during the summer of 2020 planned, it's just come out, actually planned many elements of January 6th. What are we going to do if Trump won't leave? What are we going to do if he challenges the election? Well, let's just have a riot, okay? And let's do some of these things which actually happened on January 6th. So this is the evil force we face, but it's not new in the Democratic Party. The current formation starts with one guy, Barack Hussein Obama, running essentially the same shtick which these younger people are doing. The older generation is ossified. The older political establishment is corrupt. I'm Barack Obama. I'm a young man, dynamic, charismatic, and I'm for hope and change. All right. Just look at what happened. 2008, 2009, he stood up and said, I'm the person who's keeping the pitchfork away from you, in a big meeting with the New York banks. What did he do? He bailed all of them out, along with all the European banks, all the international banks, on the back of the American and middle class, who he said, I'm the new guy who's here to represent you. So there's really, that's how I'd put it. And that's how I think, that's the battle I think we're facing.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect to this. Again, it comes back to the fact that Donald Trump has created a new movement. It already existed in 2016 when it put him into office. You saw it in 2024 when he took the swing states and the blue states back with enough votes that we could make it too big to rig and win. And now you see this other potential, move of normal people, Black Detroiters and others, toward a new Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, which means that some of these more nicely dressed up enemy operations are not working any longer. And what I see in terms of them activating this radical extremist wing of the party is that one of the options from the oligarchy, one of the options from the elites is, if we can't stop Donald Trump, we're just going to bring the whole damn thing down. We're just going to try and destroy the United States. Frankly, it's what they tried to do with the Civil War. In order to stop the growth, the maturation, the power of the American system from developing, they literally tried to destroy the nation and split it into a whole bunch of little pieces. So this is a similar kind of operation, but I think it's important for people to recognize it's coming from a position of panic, that they have not stopped Trump. He did come back in 2024. He is carrying out this economic revolution. Would it be faster if he didn't have roadblocks like the Supreme Court and judges and a Congress, which, supports him 10% of the time if he's lucky? Yeah, it would be going a lot faster, but it's happening. We're having it. He has launched an economic revolution. And the more people get off the plantation and say, wow, yeah, that's the future that I want. That's certainly the future I want for my kid. The more desperate these guys get, and the more they get into the mode of just burn the whole thing down, which is an aspect of activating this particular operation that they have. Doesn't mean they don't have other ones. They've got over there in a package, the so-called the Mark Carneys, with their globalism 2.0 and their Alyssa Slotkins and their Mark Kellys and whoever else they might want to package as a non-crazy. But right now, what's been activated is this, after me, the deluge, just burn it down.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you to all of our wonderful audience here joining us today. I have so many super chats here. I'm going to try and get through some more. So let's stay on topic here. First, quick shout out here to Hawksman. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish 1 million more would join the effort. Well, help recruit somebody. Help recruit somebody. Just one person. Just focus on one person, trying to find one person you can talk to. So thank you for joining us, Hawks. And Dora. Hi, Barb, Adam, and Susan from Connecticut. Working Families Party and the Services Employee International Union campaigned for and helped a DSA Democrat win. Is there a socialism component to this, and how do I expose this to acquaintances? Thank you very much for your question.
Well, they say it. I mean, you should just take a look at the DSA. Just Google it, Democrat Socialists of America. They'll lay it out right there on their page. You should particularly look at their platform statement, which you're hearing a lot about on the news channels at this point. We're calling for abolishing the Senate, abolishing the office of president as it currently exists, abolishing the Supreme Court as it exists, and everybody should basically report to the Congress. All right, that becomes the key open institution. Well, does that remind you of anything like Parliament in Britain or, some of these other things? Britain, by the way, the Labour Party is explicitly socialist, and they'll tell you that. And just look up Fabian socialism in your on your Google searches there, and you'll see that Tony Blair, the whole Labour Party, will tell you that they're socialists, but what they call centralist socialists. All right, and that is that the biggest crime of socialism and communism are twofold. One is their atheism and materialism, and the second is their downgrading of the individual in favor of the collective. All right, actual history is made by individuals. All right, by the Elon Musk, by the grand inventors of the world who invent whole new technologies, etc. And in the American system, what we say, what Hamilton said, what Carey said, what all of the authors of the American system say is we exist to support what we call labor power. All right, it's not capital that actually makes an economy work. It's the human individual inspired to make new discoveries so that the life of the next generation can be better than our own. All right, and that in a nutshell is the difference between the two systems. Communism will tell you, okay, there's a fixed set of goods, and what we ought to do is redistribute them from the very rich to the very poor so that everybody's central kind of foundations in life, what to eat, all this stuff I can buy, all of this other stuff is satisfied. What the American system says is we reward completely creativity by the individual. That's what should be the barometer of what we actually think is the best for society. So again, it's all very publicly available. The Democrat Socialists of America say it. All right. The families and the Working Families Party, the SEIU in recent period have actually operated adjacent to the DSA. They're the same thing for all practical purposes. So you just ask whoever is in the Working Families Party or the SEIU, do you know about the American system? They'll say no, have no idea about it. Second, are you a socialist? Do you believe that socialism is better than capitalism? Now, a distinction. We're not defending the capitalism of what happened in 2008, or the capitalism of derivative speculation, or the capitalism of the yen carry trade, which is making our economy a casino. We're talking about what Donald Trump is doing to rebuild an entire productive economy, which is a completely different proposition.
Yeah, let me add in this little correction here. She said in something, it says GSA is General Assembly candidate, not DSA.
Okay.
So she may be, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know the specifics about what's going on there, but maybe Susan, you would have a better idea about this General Assembly issue.
Well, go back to the original question. So
yeah, let me pull it up here. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, she's just saying that you had these two other organizations, the Working Families Party and the SEIU, that helped somebody win a state legislative race. Yes, there is a socialism component to both. Here in Michigan, the Working Families Party and the Workers' Party has always been kind of used as a monkey wrench. You know, they get on the ballot as a third party, and then they've been used to siphon votes from, you know, other people and so on. Well, they ran very, very few candidates in this election cycle because they knew they had the DSA. It really is the same thing as the DSA. It may not go quite as extreme from the standpoint of getting rid of the president or the Supreme Court and the Senate and all that kind of stuff, but just look it up. And the SEIU has been one of the key arms of this entire Soros pantheon of nonprofits, foundations that are used to create a liberal and now increasingly socialist ecosphere that people live in. I mean, this is one of the frauds of somebody like Abdul El-Sayed, who says, well, I don't take big corporate money. Well, maybe not directly into your campaign, but these billionaire foundations are the ones that create the climate out of which you recruited all of your campaign workers. So I'm sorry, yes, you do. And SEIU is part of that. So yeah, if they don't come out with as extreme a statement as the DSA does, they're definitely part of that entire ecosphere and represent the kind of ground troops that have been created by this liberal elite. But, you know, as we're seeing with the situation in Detroit, a lot of those people who are now thinking about at least listening to Mike Rogers and maybe even voting for him were people who had been living in that ecosphere. And that ecosphere is being broken up. So, look, the way the enemy operates is they don't put all their eggs in one basket. They never have. They create a menu of organizations and ideologies, and then they see how the population is responding. So do they have to use this more Fabian one where you kind of cloak who you really are in something which doesn't sound too frightening? Or do you go completely batshit crazily, like the communist who won in the New York congressional race, and just let it all hang out? Well, part of what they're doing is seeing how the population responds. And then, tweaking. All right, are we going to go with this? Are we going to push that? That's how they operate. But that all works in a world where all the American people are doing is reacting. If people ground themselves in what do I actually believe? And where do those beliefs come from? And then build your mental apparatus from there, which is what we're constantly challenging people to do. What are the principles? What are the basics? Then I think people are not going to respond to this kind of social engineering, which the enemy has definitely mastered, but it's always, always dependent on the fact that you're not using your God-given creativity to see through this stuff.
Yeah, for Dora, if you just want to actually show something concrete, just Google Open Society Foundation, George Soros, and the Working Families Party, and you'll see that this is a wholly owned subsidiary of George Soros.
You're muted, Adam.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Susan, and thank you to all of our wonderful viewers on the show right now. We're going to hit some more super chats real quick. First, really generous contribution. Thank you, Susan, for joining us every week. What a busy show just listening today. And Mother of Pearl, God had other plans for my sharing your half page during travels. Didn't want me talking politics, lost my voice for the whole trip. Regained it when I got home. Not a joke. I believe it was time to unplug and unrest. Back recharged more than ever. Thank you, Promethean. And thank you, Mother of Pearl, for joining us. Yeah, sometimes that is the way of taking rest when God kind of enforces a bit of sickness on you. Hopefully it wasn't too caused by allergies. But thank you very much, Mother of Pearl. I hope you get well soon. And I hope to see you on the next boot camp when we have it. I hope you're on our boot camp. So thank you very much for joining us today. All right, let's hop back. I have plenty more questions in the super chat, which I'm going to get to. But before that, I want to switch back to another question from our email newsletter subscribers. Again, we're going to stick on this topic for a little longer. So here's a little bit of a wider historical question. Susan, are you still here? I want to make sure you hear this one. Okay. So this is a one from Ted, continuing on what we were just discussing, but much more of a longer historical arc in this one. Could what we are witnessing in America be the beginning of a historic political realignment rather than simply another election cycle? As the Democratic Party moves forward towards democratic socialism and increasingly radical positions, or is perceived by voters as doing so, could that ultimately push more working class, Black, Hispanic, and traditionally Democratic voters into the Republican Party, creating a much broader multiracial MAGA coalition? At the same time, Tucker Carlson and others have discussed the possibility of a new populist political movement or third party. Could these developments eventually intersect? In other words, could the Democratic Party become so ideologically isolated that it declines or even collapses as a major national party, while the MAGA coalition itself eventually divides and a new America First populist movement emerges as America's second major political force, something analogous to the collapse of the Whigs and the rise of the Republican Party in the 1850s. But the larger question I have is about agency. Is this simply an organic political realignment driven by voters and historical forces, or are influential political, financial, or geopolitical interests already anticipating this formation and consciously attempting to shape it? Does Donald Trump recognize the possibility of such a realignment and deliberately emphasize the threat of socialism or communism as a way of accelerating the movement of traditional Democratic constituencies into the Republican coalition? Is the apparent fracture developing within MAGA potentially part of an emerging post-Trump political order? And from Promethean Action's historical perspective, is there credible evidence that the British or other international oligarchical interests are attempting to influence or exploit these divisions? Ultimately, we are simply watching a historical American political realignment happen organically, or are we watching competing forces consciously fighting to determine what America's next political system will look like?
Well, Ted, I wanted to have Adam read that all because I thought it was a very, very perceptive question, and I think it's both. I mean, what you're saying is some of this orchestrated, is some of this a natural political alignment? But think about it from this standpoint. Go back throughout American history, and I think it will just put it all in very sharp relief. We had the American Revolution waged and fought against the British Empire. We had the development of the American system of political economy, finally giving a nation the tools that it needed to defend itself from the British imperial system: national banking, tariffs, internal improvements. In other words, organize your economy around actual production and not who controls the money. And the natural political alignment that you have, breaks down along those lines. You had the especially with the emergence of the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln. That was the party that represented that American system economic outlook. And that's the part which I think is kind of organic, in the sense that celebrating human beings as human beings and organizing your economy from the standpoint of unleashing their creative potential, that's very organic. And honestly, if that were just allowed to develop without this evil oligarchical infection coming in, constantly trying to snuff it out, and then I think the world would be a much happier place than it is today, because we'd be far, far advanced in terms of where mankind was. But you do have this oligarchy, which has been concentrated in the British imperial institutions, especially over the course of the past 250 and 300 years. So what you've seen throughout American history is the British create, when they recognize that there is a transformation going on, or they try and stop the organic development of this American system. And that's where you get back to the Civil War, where the British backed the Confederacy. They were the originators of slavery. They were the ones that made sure that it came back into the United States after we had pretty much snuffed it out by 1800, early part of that century. The success of the American system was basically atrophying slavery, and the British made sure that it came back in. They created the political phenomenon of the modern day Democratic Party, which was Wall Street slaveholders, and British bankers, basically. And for a while, you didn't have any party really representing the American outlook, because the Whigs had failed and the Federalists had failed and so on. So you get the emergence of Abraham Lincoln's new Republican Party. So that was organic in the sense that you needed, this American impulse is constantly looking for an institution, leaders that will bring it back to life. And that's what you're seeing with Donald Trump. And that's what you are seeing with the MAGA movement. But then at the same time, you're always going to have the oligarchs coming in. How can we screw that up? Now, the way they screwed up the Republican Party was pretty straightforward. They assassinated 3 Republican presidents in a row: Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley. And again, you had this very interesting phenomenon for a couple of decades. After McKinley's death, neither party represented that organic American system outlook, kind of like what we lived through in the 1980s, the 1990s, up until Barack Obama. No institution represented that organic American outlook. And then something emerged, and it was Franklin Roosevelt. And it doesn't mean all of his policies were super duper. They weren't all super duper. But there was an American system impulse, which then attracted workers, minorities, farmers who had historically been Republican. So you got that new kind of realignment. And then what did the oligarchs do? Well, they kill your best post-war Democrat, which is John Kennedy, and they kill probably his successor, his brother, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., and they take over that institution. And again, you end, we all know the phenomenon of the uniparty, because for the period, say, between Ross Perot and Donald Trump, Buchanan was in there, but there was like no institution where that American impulse could manifest itself. And that's what Trump has brought back. So what is the oligarchy doing now? All the things that you're saying. The Democratic Party, they're figuring out which kind of combination of crazy might play best in the American population to damage or cripple the country. But obviously they have this other option with some kind of anti-Trump populist movement, for which the pathetic and unfortunate Tucker is the poster boy. How anybody can have any credibility after treating Hunter Biden like a sterling figure, who should be listened to, I don't know. But yeah, they're going to play with all of that. What's organic is the desire to have an institution, a movement that represents the actual American system. What is orchestrated is all the different ways the British Empire tries to screw that up. But I thought it was an excellent question because it's the kind of strategic thinking that people have to be engaged in, that you're in a period of political change. We are in a period of massive political change. You know, the politics of the past 40 years, they're over. You know, however you think politics worked, however you think candidates were chosen, that is over because Donald Trump has been the disruptor of the first quarter of this century, and I suspect it will continue a little bit longer.
Barbara, your thoughts on this question here regarding the political dynamic of both, you know, the Democratic Party becoming mega radicalized, then you have Tucker Carlson and all these other people that are trying to split the Republican Party. Is this an organic movement, or are there actually deeper forces here that are kind of using society to do what they want?
Well, you know, I don't think that Tucker and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie are an organic development, period, kind of end of story. If you think about, put yourself in the mindset of the enemy, you know, right after the 2024 election, where you have a vast coalition coming together behind President Trump, and his mantra is, I want to unify this very divided country. Now, what happens? Very quickly, one of the guys who's the glue of what happened in November of 2024, Charlie Kirk, gets assassinated. Tucker Carlson was very close to Charlie Kirk, as were numerous figures. And all of them have kind of different reactions to it, because that's what happens when you have an assassination. Psychological warfare is the very purpose of political assassinations. It's to convince you that, you know, it's not worth it. You could die doing this. But what we're saying is, hey, if you're in this movement, if you really want to change the United States, you have to be willing to die for the principle of doing that. That kind of commitment is the kind that actually wins political battles for immortality, not just for the present moment. So the Tucker, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, the Epstein files, and you know, Israel runs the entire world, and you know, Hunter Biden's laptop wasn't, you know, basically a real thing. It wasn't Russian disinformation. It was, you know, Mossad disinformation. They just got it wrong. All right. And, you know, basically, you know, the whole story is so crazy that, you know, it's just ridiculous. But the problem is that a lot of people got locked into each one of these cyber operations designed to split the coalition, which actually elected Trump in 2024. They got caught up in it, all right, because it works when you're just looking at the internet and you're not functioning on the standpoint of political principle and thinking what this is about. It's pretty easy to get all absorbed by whether Larry Johnson thinks the rifle that killed Charlie Kirk is the right one and which way did the bullet go and this, that, and the other, rather than facing the reality, which is much more scary, of that assassination being what it was. We can program people to kill presidents at this point on the internet. We don't need MK Ultra. We basically have an entire trans movement out there, which you've got trans killers right now out there being programmed on the internet. All right. And yes, Tyler Robinson did kill Charlie Kirk, and he did use his grandfather's rifle to do it. That's been conclusively proven. But you're never going to get people off this thing, because they now are, you know, wedded to this idea in their heads that I know something sitting in my armchair here at home about what happened, that I'm just going to disregard all of the evidence because I'm sucked into what really is, in some of these chat groups, a cult-like kind of behavior. So, you know, it's, you have to look at it for what it is. They came to assassinate the movement. They continued what they did in 2020 forward to assassinate the movement. We're finding out a lot more about that right now. But that's what they did from 2024 forward. And much as I might think I liked Tucker Carlson before, I really abhor him now. He's crazy, and he's revealed himself to be exactly what he is, which is a mental midget.
I think, Barbara, just to comment, to extend what you're just saying, I think the challenge of a lot of people is intellectual cowardice. It's safer for the ego to hold on to this fake idea than the process of having to admit, hey, I was wrong. And going through that process of honestly saying, hey, you know what, I was wrong about this, actually takes courage. And so I think there's a lot of really, like you said, small-minded, intellectually weak people that have little intellectual courage to be able to say, hey, guys, I was wrong. So yes, there's definitely a lot of that going on in the country right now. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please drop us a like on YouTube. If you're on x.com, I believe you can double tap on the stream, and I think that gives us a like. So you can give us a double tap on x.com and give us a quick like. Thank you, everyone. We have plenty more questions to come here. Let me go to this next one here because this one's coming up a lot. And it's really quick question. Craig says, could a McCarthy type of hearings on communism within America ever happen again? Thank you, Craig, for your question. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts.
Well, I'm not really intrigued by having, those hearings were really quite abusive in many respects. And they were played as political theater. What we actually have to do is much more difficult. We have to inoculate the population right now about what socialism and communism are and where they come from. The same thing with radical Islam. And what's going on, just so you know, is, the Trump administration is way, way, way beyond what you're talking about in terms of having a congressional hearing. They're actually going after the bank accounts of the people who are involved in this. They're actually going for indictments of the people who are involved in this. They're actually going for civil suits. They're actually deporting people who are here on visas. Marco Rubio is doing a whole job in the State Department, actually just getting rid of them. If you come here and you're a radical Islamist and you're on a visa, you're gone. All right. And so I think what's happening is far, far, far beyond what McCarthy ever thought of doing. The Trump administration is doing through, and we're also knocking out through the fraud investigations, the entire funding infrastructure for this. Scott Bessent is looking at all of the 501c3s and 501c4s for people who are in our international audience. That's the provisions of the tax code of the United States that allow these foundations and groups to actually function. And the IRS is going to be conducting major operations to actually deny them tax-exempt status because they're obviously functioning politically, which they're not supposed to do, among other things, finding out how they've actually used their money. How do they use their money? Do they use their money to fund all these Antifa terrorists? That's something the government is right now investigating. So I think the Trump administration is 8 steps ahead of congressional hearings in terms of what they're actually doing about this.
Thank you, Barbara. Susan, any comments on this one?
No, I'm with Barbara.
Okay.
I've seen few congressional hearings that really did much of any good, certainly in the current incarnation. There have been some.
Except for the Fauci hearings.
Oh, that's obviously the latest, the one. And there have been a few others where the congressmen are actually honestly trying to tell a story and get information out in that venue. But so many of them are just political grandstanding with talking points they don't accomplish that much. I think the president has a much better bully pulpit than the Congress has, and Scott Bessent and the Justice Department.
Thank you very much, Susan. All right, we're going to head back to our super chat questions, and I'm going to take two here from Mercenary, which I think it kind of expressed something similar. So first, he says, first off, thank you very much, friend, for sending in these questions. I've been spreading word about Promethean everywhere I can, especially on my Discord servers that I visit. However, it's pretty difficult to get people to see. I gotta say something feels like a rug pull is coming from T-Man, Donald Trump. And he goes on to say, the worst part about all this is how much of history is a lie. It's been so twisted to the point where we can't tell without some sort of outside help. For example, either Lincoln was a uniter or that he was a tyrant. Okay. Before I open this up for Barbara and Susan, I just want to add my 2 cents, because I think you're probably a younger person like I am. You have to realize that there's a saying with food that says you are what you eat, which is absolutely true, right? No one at this point, especially the millennials, were all becoming really health focused. Millennial generation, younger ones have also always kind of been health focused, but it's even more now. You are what you eat. Absolutely. Right. If you eat crappy food all day, if you eat junk food that just tastes good all day, you're going to look like crap. And people forget that the exact same analogy can be made about media. The content that you consume on those Discord channels is bullshit garbage, bro. And if all you're taking in on these Discord channels is a bunch of what amounts to intellectual junk food, well, then you're never going to get healthy. And my suggestion to everyone that's caught up in this situation, I say this, try to point this out a lot on my x.com. You need to get out of the domain of just consuming all this media, right? And you have to figure out, how can I do this for my own? How can I find my voice and actually add something creatively to this discussion instead of just consuming everyone else's point of view, which sounds to me like you're struggling with. So Barbara and Susan, the worst part about all this is how much of history is a lie. It's been so twisted, we can't tell with anyone's sort of help. How would you help guide somebody who's struggling to make sense of what's going on in the world?
Well, I'd say go to the library to start. Get off the internet and go to the library. I find with Abraham Lincoln, actually thinking about, put yourself in his shoes. Here he is. He's the president of the United States. He had to basically, in his first term, come in they're talking about this disguise with Trump in the plane. Well, Lincoln had to come into Washington, D.C. in a disguised train because they're going to kill him on the train. It's a very similar kind of situation. But read Lincoln and think about, how does his mind work? His words are there. You can get it in the library. You can actually understand the man and his mind and how he's thinking by reading him. When you start to put down things in scripts or words or whatever, you're out there. You can't hide, as Adam will tell you. And basically, every single one of our founders is like that. Now, the historical record is there, all right, for the most part. We, in our former association, did so much original work like that, of actually trying to figure it out, trying to figure out the history. So I'm not going to give you a recipe to say, go read this in the old LaRouche pub or EIR, but I find that actually getting acquainted with these people from our history and actually treating them as friends and saying, why did you do that? What was behind that? And then that leads you to the next level of thinking about it. Well, it becomes obvious why certain things were done. Was Lincoln a uniter? Absolutely. He tried like hell to prevent the Civil War, tried everything possible but it didn't work. Was he a tyrant because he revoked habeas? That was a necessary step at that point in time when you have traitors and insurrectionists actually causing, not just talking about it, but causing the division of the country. Learn about the Civil War. What was it about? England controlled the entire England, all right? Controlled the entire South because of the cotton trade and the slave trade earlier. That was New England and the South, all right? The British were coming in on the side of the South to destroy the United States of America. That's the problem. And half of America actually believed in the British idea of things. That was Lincoln's problem. That's the problem he had to solve. He tried like hell to avoid a civil war because he knew that that would actually, end up in being so destructive, which it was. But ultimately, we could come out of it as a republic. Think about the Gettysburg Address. And what did he say there? That's why I have him, right back there. A government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. That is unique in history. That's his solution to the entire array of problems I just threw out to you that he was facing. So you can go to the library, which is kind of radical at this point in time. And you can, Lincoln wrote it all down. He's got a huge volume of Abraham Lincoln's works. And it'll take you all the way from, the Civil War, how he thought about things, etc. And that's what I always try and do. I try and go to the people themselves and go to the original sources rather than taking secondary interpretations of stuff and making it very personal. What was this person thinking? What was he facing? What did he actually do? And that's, I think, the kind of best method to adopt to get you through the conundrum you face.
I want to say Mercenary put something in the chat where he said, "I'm not struggling, I'm frustrated by others," which is completely understandable. And I think, the other side of this is how do you address those others who are falling for all of this stuff? It was interesting. Last night, I was on a Zoom discussion with some really good activists in Arizona. And one of them raised a similar question. It wasn't in the context of a Discord group, but it was in the context of organizing young people. And they said, how would you approach this? How do you puncture people who are in this? And, I've tried various things in discussions with people and so on, but it just occurred to me that maybe the first thing that you have to do is with the person that you're talking to, find out what they think is wrong. What is it you think is actually wrong? And then what you might rapidly discover is that the solution to what they think is wrong, and they may have a solution to it, which is like one classic example, socialism, right? But what if you can then present to them that the solution to their question comes from someplace outside everything they've ever been told, like this choice, Lincoln is this or Lincoln is that. I mean, clearly, I think he is a uniter, but to introduce something which isn't already in the discourse, but which addresses but comes from this outside to address what it is. What do you think is the problem here? What should we do? What do you think the problem is? Rather than, as both Barbara and Adam have said, these kind of sterile, well, here's my position on this. I mean, I'll never forget one of our friends from way back once went to a convention. We used to intervene. We'd go to leftist conventions and Democratic Party conventions, and we just sort of go in there and, just intervene with our ideas. And this person ran into one of your typical lefties, who wouldn't talk to us unless we told us, what is your position on this? Like so many times you've seen this. And my friend just sort of flipped it on its head and said, what is your position on hard-boiled eggs? I mean, it's just this positioning, this, where do you stand in the catechism? As opposed to, do you think there was actually a problem? where do you think the problem actually came from? And where you might rapidly describe these sort of sterile, silly position solutions in no way whatsoever address where a problem actually came from. Anyway, that's what I would throw into our friend who's clearly trying to rescue people in this universe.
Yeah, it's like people are arguing what level of purgatory. What level of purgatory should I be chilling at? Is that level over there a little bit of a better hangout than the one that I'm sitting in? Also, Mercenary, I just want to help you on your journey there of helping to help others see what you see. It actually is less about other people and more about yourself, and understanding yourself well enough to actually be able to communicate to other people. So I urge you to think about it more. I think Barbara's angle about going back to the original sources is so important, right? Because you're consuming all these secondhand accounts of everything. And I'm almost certain you haven't probably gone to the original sources all that much, because honestly, most people don't. They just want to get the cliff notes for everything. Because doing the original work, reading the original sources, putting yourself in that mindset, trying to figure it out on your own, that's the creative historical work that people don't do.
And by the way, there's a current really simple way to begin, to start to use that methodology. And I've said it before, just watch a cabinet meeting, go to the White House website, read what they say, listen to an interview by J.D. Vance or Scott Bessent, not the clips, the whole thing. Listen to how their minds work. Listen to how they're approaching a problem. So that's sort of a current, very simple way to begin to get much more used to this method of actually your mind being in dialogue with another living person's mind, trying to actually solve a problem rather than, getting some kind of comment which will be clickbait.
Let me move that, add this to stage. I want to just show this out. So the Trump administration just launched this app, which is something that we've always talked about, which is like, you need to follow what the president is doing from his own. Here, let me pull down this thing here so people can see a little bit more of this. So the White House has just launched this new app, like literally just a few weeks ago. I don't know why it hasn't been making more rounds here yet. Where's the Mercenary? I have too many super chats now, and I'm just like scrolling through like 20 of them. Here we go. So yeah, you can check it out right here. You can get it on Google Play and the Apple App Store. So again, the official White House app, official mobile app from the White House, real-time updates, live events, and direct access to the president all in one app. So now everyone, you don't really have an excuse. You can actually follow what the president wants you to see. You can follow all of the live events that he does, because President Trump does events like every day. He's doing something, at least one a day. So I just wanted to call everyone's attention to this because I only found out about this just a few days ago myself. So thank you everyone for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, please drop us a like. On x.com, you can double tap on the stream. That'll also give us a like on x.com. And thank you very much, Mercenary, for sending in your question. I'm going to go here back to our email newsletter. I'm going to take a question here that was very thoughtful and does express a lot of what people are feeling in the United States. Gregory says, thank you. You're doing a great work in the order of former great patriots. I'm a retired 69-year-old Social Security recipient who with his wife have suffered dearly through this horrible time, 2021 to 2026 of inflation. We were promised relief during the 2024 rallies of the president, no wars, $2 gas, 1955 prices. Then he said, you will have more money than you can know what to do with. My last Social Security raise was 2.8%, while inflation last year, the real inflation, my pocket inflation, was about 30. The question is, with no convictions of the criminals, the Epstein list people still enjoying their life and their wealth, the war still going strong and the voting system still in shambles, and finally inflation still of the roof for final inflation still off the roof for senior citizens like me who have suffered profusely, how can we still trust the president when he says anything? I voted and supported the president 3 times. Thank you, Gregory, for your question and for being honestly expressing your feelings to us. Barbara and Susan, how do you respond to people that are in this situation?
Well, the way I respond is I always take people back to the situation of our founding fathers. And it's kind of important to do that as a mindset in the present moment. And I think about what was it like, what were they thinking about the night before they actually signed the Declaration of Independence and said, we're pledging, in essence, our lives, our property, and everything we have and our sacred honor for a cause we don't know whether it's going to succeed or not. I can't tell you, I'm on Social Security. I know the pain that it actually causes when I go to the grocery store. I also really, really try and investigate why these things are the way they are. Under Joe Biden, inflation was running at, in real terms, I think it's probably around 30, percent. And the Social Security Trust Fund is really dependent on a lot of people paying into it who are new workers. That's a problem because, basically a lot of the women in our country have bought into the idea that they shouldn't have kids. And we're suffering from a deficit in terms of what's being paid into the fund. The war, okay, was it necessary or not? You have to really think about that. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, think about how it's actually played out here. First of all, if I'm Donald Trump and I'm saying, okay, here's my plan, guys, I'm telling you, I'm going to rebuild the US economy. Well, where's the financing come to do that? How does that actually work? And then suddenly you discover, well, I can't just do it from inside the United States because why? Because there's a global system of finance at this point, and all of our industry and everything else is in some other country, okay? And so I have to start to deal with the world at that point in terms of what is the control point of all that financing. It's called the City of London. And we've gone through that in a lot of our various briefings. What has the Iran war done as a complementary feature? It's broken up all of the income on which the City of London depends. It has brought some, I can't remember how many trillions of dollars the Gulf countries from that war have actually invested in the United States, but they've taken away from London and put it here. To do what? To build factories to generate a bountiful economy. Do I think Trump will do something about Social Security during the course of 2026 before the midterms to actually relieve some of the load? Yes, I do. But the biggest problem that we have if we're seniors is a rotten healthcare system. And Trump is doing enormous things on that. He's actually reduced the price of drugs, prescription drugs, to the lowest anywhere in the world. Has he yet overcome Obamacare and all the craziness that goes on there? Yes, he has. Is he trying to get more money into Medicare by eliminating the fraud? Doing that. All right. So the things you go back to in terms of the campaign don't take into account what happens when I try to govern and actually face real problems and solve them on the same principles I'm telling people. Can we rebuild the economy on a dime and just snap our fingers and say, okay, here it comes? It's being rebuilt. But that takes time. You got to build the factories. You got to jawbone the crazy people who offshored things and said, I just gave you a tax credit to build here, and I'm going to tariff the hell out of you if you don't bring your industry back to the United States. Being done. It doesn't eliminate the fact that meat costs an arm and a leg. Why is that? Why is that? Why does it cost an arm and a leg? Is it because Trump did the Iran war? No, it's because we don't have any cattle herds that are actually mature enough to slaughter. When he tries to go to Argentina to get beef to actually import it, the Cattlemen's Association goes crazy and says, "Why, you're screwing us, and we'll make a big deal about it." So, all of these problems are things which were created under Biden. A huge hole. We're almost destroyed when you actually look at it. We're digging our way out of it. And I can't tell you, essentially, that it is still painful for everybody who's on Social Security. When you're looking at, okay, I got it, my husband needs this today, and it costs X amount of money because it's a branded drug, it's not generic, and none of the things have it on their you're poor and you can buy it list. But go to Trump RX. We're gradually making progress in bringing those prices down. The hospital system is really screwed up for seniors, totally. But there has to be an answer to that. The Republicans haven't come up with one, but Obamacare created the present mess. So we've got to come up with a solution. So I think that, but the other thing which you're doing here is you're looking at the enemy operation, which I just described, to actually break you away from the president, to yammer at you. He said there would be no wars. Well, what happens when I discover, at least, in terms of what's being talked about here, that one, I can't finance things because the British control everything. The City of London and Wall Street control everything. And two, Iran is about to get a nuclear weapon, which would destroy the oil trade in the Middle East if that erupted. And we see the impacts of that on the world economy still at this point if the Middle East goes completely nuts. Were the Iranians ready to talk peace and get an economic deal and join in actually, stabilizing the situation? No, they were not. But you're going to see the gas prices come down quickly, well before the midterms, either through Trump strong-arming the oil companies and the refiners, or through an actual settlement of the Strait of Hormuz. So, I just think that, patience in the pain is what I have to counsel, because I have my eye on the future and what we're trying to create, not for our generation necessarily, but for the next one. And I think about my parents going to World War II. Why'd they do that? For me, for the next generation. They put their lives on the line for this country. And that's the kind of spirit I think we've got to invoke in people to actually think through the present period.
Yeah, and I would also just add, look, when you campaign for office, you tell people what you want to do, but people have to recognize we are a system of separation of powers. And if you look at how much sabotage this president has been up against from this Congress, from the Supreme Court, from the Democratic governors in the courts. Look, think about the tariff question. The president wanted to give people tariff checks, and he probably, would have done that. That would have been a cool, maybe $2,000 in your family's pocket, right? But what happened? A bunch of Democratic governors sued the president's tariff policy. It was Democratic governors. Let's not forget that. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court threw out his ability to tariff using the IAPA provisions. So threw all of that back, slowed the entire process down, forced them to do certain refunds. Now, who got the refunds? You? No. The refunds went to the corporations. Did the corporations pass that back on to you? No. But as Scott Bessent said the other day, so what these Democratic state attorney generals did is essentially they just did a big pile of corporate welfare, right? So, we're in a battle. My friend, retired General Blaine Holt, always says, in a war, the enemy always has a vote. So you have a globalist apparatus out there, which obviously has tremendous capabilities in terms of Democratic Party officials, whether they're in Congress or in the states, control of the courts, and this gets to the whole question of accountability and arrests. Yeah, let's go arrest a bunch of people and have the indictments thrown out, or a Democratic contaminated jury pool declare them innocent. So you felt good for a couple of minutes, and then justice wasn't done. You're in a battlefield where you've got an enemy which is fighting tooth and nail to prevent Trump from bringing the American system back in full and as fast as he possibly can. Their strategy has been throw sand in the wheels so that you are still struggling when you get to the polls in November. And because of that, you vote against the president. And this battle, which we're in the middle of, would be like abandoning the fight in 1943 because you were tired of not being able to, buy coffee in World War II. It's a fight. People sacrifice. And nobody is saying that it's easy for those layers of the population, which especially people who, have limited capped Social Security and nothing else. That is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly challenging and difficult. And we hear that. But the alternative is not to stop fighting and surrender to the enemy. The alternative is we got to see this thing through to the end.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan, for your this answer to this very challenging question. A lot of people reach out with very similar stories. So thank you. Thank you very much, Gregory, for sending in your question. Please consider subscribing to our free email newsletter. Okay, super chats. Everyone with the super chat, I'm going to try and get through these as quickly as possible. My apologies if I don't get to yours in this show here. Tongsley says, good to see Susan on Patrick Bet David's show. Keep up the good work. Thank you for joining us here, brother. Winkie the cat. Thank you. First off, very cute kitty you have there. I know you sent this in earlier when I think Susan was talking about this. So maybe maybe Barbara and Susan can talk about this a little bit. Can you give us a brief overview of your political journey from the 60s supporting RFK to supporting Trump?
Yeah. As I've said many times, I was campaigning for RFK Sr. In San Francisco in 1968 when he was shot in Los Angeles. And when you think about what I was talking about earlier in terms of a period of time where it doesn't seem like there's any individual or institution that you can turn to who in some way has the courage and the vision to save the country. And that is what happened with me and a whole lot of other people after 1968. But I was one of the lucky ones because I ran into Lyndon LaRouche and his organization in 1971. And even though I didn't understand a lot of what he was talking about at the time, I said, this makes more sense than anything I've heard, in 3.5 years at the University of Michigan. That was for damn sure. And I said, I think I'll stick around and try and figure this out. And here I am, how many years? 55 years later, and still figuring it out, by the way, which is part of the very nice journey. But I want to kind of highlight this journey from a more contemporary standpoint, because obviously when Donald Trump came along in 2016, it was like, okay, and especially with this second term, with the consciousness with which this administration is reviving the American system, is talking about Alexander Hamilton, is using tariffs, is, as Donald Trump said in that thing I showed at the very beginning, people are coming back to the party of Abraham Lincoln. It has indeed been a journey, but there was one little step in between, which I want to share with people. Back in 2020, when we were fighting for President Trump's reelection, I'm in the Detroit area. We're near the famous River Rouge plant, the Ford plant, which used to have 100,000 workers at it, nowhere near that order of magnitude less, but they build the best-selling truck in America, the Ford F-150. And it's still kind of iconic in terms of American industrial might. And there's a overpass on the freeway right before the workers go in to the plant. So we made a huge, out of a bed sheet, we made a huge sign and hung it over the overpass. And it said, Donald Trump, the best Democrat since JFK. And we got honks and honks and honks from the guys as they were going into the plant. And so it's not that different from Donald Trump's political journey, because he used to be a Democrat, or for that matter, Ronald Reagan's, because he used to be a Democrat, because the Franklin Roosevelt Democratic Party, despite some of the haters in the chat, and again, I'm not defending all of Franklin Roosevelt's policies, but there were some haters in the chat, revived the American system, and that's how we won World War II. Plain and simple, period. The world would be under fascism if it were not for Franklin Roosevelt reviving the American system, creating the arsenal of democracy, and providing the material so that mankind could defeat the Nazis. But again, as we've discussed throughout this show, the enemy then tries to destroy whatever institution has become the vehicle for the American system impulse. So here we are 80 years later, they certainly have destroyed the Democratic Party as that impulse. So a lot of people have taken different journeys, to get to the MAGA movement today, whether they're conscious of the fact that it's an American system impulse pushing them, or whether it's just what is sort of inherently American in so many people, like you see in Donald Trump. The man is just a damn builder. He just loves to build things. He lives in the real world. He knows what kind of concrete. He knows what kind of lining you need to put in the reflecting pool. He knows what kind of paint will work under this circumstance and not that circumstance. To be a builder, an actual builder, means you have to live IRL. You have to live in the real world. You can't have a damn opinion that somebody gave you in an X chat. You live in the real world. Elon Musk, same thing. Why does he blow up so many rockets? Because the real world tells you whether your current opinion about how to do this is right or wrong. And then you look at, all right, well, I thought that worked. No, it just blew up on the launch pad. Well, what was the problem there? You try it again. Well, we got it off the launch pad, but it blew up here, or the landing didn't stick, or whatever. Builders live in the real world. And I think for most people whose political journey has brought them to the MAGA movement, they have some connection to the real world, which actually got them there. Whatever political formation was reflecting some little part of that at the time, you made your own journey.
Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you, Winkie, for sending in your question. Consider subscribing to our free newsletter. Everyone, the link is in the description. It's completely free. If you'd like, so if you liked what you've been watching today, and you would like to support us with a $10 a month monthly subscription, there's a link to our free email newsletter. Yes, it's free, but as you sign up, we just ask, hey, can you contribute $10 a month? So if you want to contribute a little bit towards helping us grow and reach more people, again, get email newsletter. I have both a daily and a weekly subscription, because if you select the daily, we send at least one email a day. We're probably but some people don't mind that. But we also have a weekly thing, and eventually I would like to launch a digest. So somewhere between a weekly and a daily subscription, but that's one of my next steps to have. So consider getting our email newsletter. So thank you. Okay. More questions from our audience. And I'm going to try and get through as many of these as possible. So let's see here. Johan, so let me take these two from our friends across the pond. Johan, thank you guys for everything you do. God bless all. When will people wake up and see what the real truth is? God bless President Trump. Thank you, Johan, for joining us from across the pond. And Miss Rels says, polls in Wisconsin seem to be way off. Is there more to that? What does this mean for the midterm outlook? Is woke 2 sufficient mitigation against Iran, gas prices, and affordability? Great job as always. Barbara and Susan. the woke one and woke two. That woke one. That was pretty very insightful.
Right. That is a very insightful question. What's being talked about here for people who sort of aren't glued to X or glued to the Sunday shows like I have to be, is AOC was on the Sunday shows trying, like all of these, DSA people, Socialist Democrats are doing, to just destroy the entire previous existence they had. So what was most remarkable by AOC, who everybody thinks is running for president, is she introduces into her interview on ABC News, she says, oh, and by the way, I have a New York City councilman who always tells me woke one was pretty crazy. And that's true. It was pretty crazy, right? What is she talking about? She's talking about mostly the summer of 2020 and before, out of what you got, the so-called woke censorship, vilification, Salem witch trials of everybody who actually wanted to have a dissenting opinion brought into existence, the woke stuff, all right? The actual overthrow of the government of the United States when you actually really get down to it. So what the questioner is asking, which is very funny, is she, basically then the immediate question which arose after she dismissed woke one as crazy is, what the hell is she talking about? What is woke two? What could it possibly be? That's what people are actually talking about on the internet at this point. And she asked the question, is woke two sufficient mitigation against Iran, gas prices, and affordability? I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it's a second mind control phase of their operation against the people of the United States. The polls in Wisconsin are off just as much as the polls in Michigan. There's lots of explanations which people are given for that, like the fact that the Wisconsin race actually broke open when the governor came in and endorsed the guy who won against the communist nitwit. And the same is sort of true of Michigan in terms of the late surge by Haley Stevens. But the polling was obviously completely crazy. I believe the polling concerning the president is probably as crazy. But I don't take anything for granted because we've got to win this thing by margins which are actually incredible when it comes to the midterms. So great question, but kind of an insider's question. So I had to basically draw it out and show what it was.
Thank you very much, friend, from joining us across the pond. Consider getting our email newsletter. Love to have you here. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Our next political update is going to be on Saturday. Okay. Cool Mom says, thank you for all you do. Thank you for joining us, Cool Mom. Teaneck, thank you. The big guy says, behind enemy lines in Teaneck, New Jersey. It's certainly very, actually, New Jersey is a very diverse state. Actually, there's parts of New Jersey that are almost like wilderness. You wouldn't know. And then you go right down the street and it's, New Jersey is the most populated state in the nation. And it also has the highest labor unions. It's the most labor union state in the country. So New Jersey is definitely an interesting place for sure. Big Chunga says, Bank of America pledging to invest in infrastructure goes perfectly with the American system of political economy. Nice choice nice choice who stepped up. Nice choice for those who stepped up. We agree. I think you're going to see more and more American companies really come to the front as the economy starts coming back in the United States. We have KP Powell says, I haven't heard you gals or any Republicans talk about what Patrick Byrne said years ago regarding a lot of things like Hillary and Obama. What do you all think? I don't even know who that is. Barbara, Susan?
We do, Barbara.
Patrick Byrne is a weird dude, okay, to say the least. He's obviously, entrenched in the intelligence community. He was a declared CIA and FBI informant, which he basically, goes around bragging about. And then he uses that to actually say what he's going to say. He has some interesting things to say. All right. But, like anything, if you're responsible, you got to basically just not take him at his word. You got to check it out. And a lot of things he's said or done particularly in terms of the craziness which went on around the 2020 vote fraud investigation, I found to be counterproductive rather than very productive. So that's how I basically evaluate that.
Yeah.
I mean, who has an affair with a woman, i.e. that claimed to be a Russian spy, i.e. Maria Butina, which he did, had a sexual affair with her at the direction of the FBI. That's pretty weird in my view.
It's your mission. Thank you, Barbara.
Should you choose to accept it?
Yeah.
And for some people, it might be mission impossible. Who knows?
Yeah. Thank you very much, KP Powell. Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Let me see if I can just say thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Hey, gang. It seems the British are really panicking over sovereign nation stances of United States, Russia, Israel, most recently Bulgaria. I wonder if they aren't trying to use Turkey to suddenly offset these sovereignty-minded nations.
It's an interesting hypothesis, but I will be the very first to say, as I've said many times, I am not an expert on Turkey. It is a very complicated country, so I'm not going to try and attribute anything at this stage of the game. I think a lot of things are being realigned, though. I think your underlying hypothesis is right. There is a lot of realignment. You now have this new defense agreement between Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. A lot of people have their hair on fire over that. Where is that going to go? What is its intention? I'm not ready to pass judgment one way or another on it, except that it's in this world where Donald Trump has kicked over the post-war rules-based order. He has shattered that chessboard, and everybody is scrambling. Some of it's coming from the empire. Some of it is maybe just countries saying, okay, well, we don't have to play by these idiotic supranational rules anymore. We're going to figure out what's best for us. Is what's best for them going to clash with what may be best for the United States at some point? Very possibly, but that's honestly how the world works.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Josh. Okay. I just want to say thank you, Paul. Sorry I didn't get excellent question, by the way. Sorry I didn't have time today. Thank you, Return to Beloved. Sally, I really appreciate your question. We're going to be talking more about this. Again, looking into the data centers, finding the pro-China. How do we know what concerns are true and which are false, right? That's exactly the kind of confusion they're trying to instill in Americans. What I'd just like to say, guys, everyone, if we didn't have data centers, we wouldn't have the show. Right? You wouldn't have any of the modern conveniences that everyone loves, but they get on the internet and they start hating on data centers. So sorry we couldn't treat your question more fully. Thank you, Melody Hart, for coming in today. Casket Dodger, was it planned to get both parents to work so they have a little time to vote, being too busy, being out of the loop? Make sure you bring your family to vote, please. So thank you very much, Casket Dodger, for joining.
I want to highlight our friend Chicky Rogue, who's one of our most loyal people, and he really does try and keep an eye on the chat. He had a very, very insightful comment, because I know people said we had a lot of bots in there today. He said, I want to thank all the foreign Aspen Institute summer interns who joined us today. Always amusing. I think you nailed it, Chicky. Good work.
I think Chicky may be female, but I'm not certain about that.
All right.
Either way,
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in on YouTube and X.com. We're going to be back next Thursday at the same time. Please get our free email newsletter. I put links in the email newsletter to send in your questions. That's where the email questions come in. And thank you very much for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you.